All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to our second panel of the day here at TBRcon21, where you're here to talk about heroes, anti-heroes, bad guys, evildoers, morally great characters. If you are familiar with Joe Dirt, Husker Do's and Husker Don'ts, and probably anything else under the sun, knowing the people that I have on this panel. Just kidding. But I almost forgot potpourri, because that's Brian Naslund's favorite subject. But before we get into all that, I want everybody to introduce themselves. So, Graham, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'm Graham Austin King. I write dark fantasy. It seems to be getting darker as I go along, so it's possible I need help. I could get therapy. Well, why not just write it down and make you guys pay for it? So that's me. I've written everything from books about twisted fairies to my latest urban fantasy, Laura Prometheus, which is about an ex-Special Forces soldier who realizes his magic. So there you go. That's me.
All right, I'm Mike Shackle. I'm the author of the Last War trilogy, the We Are the Dead and Fool's Hope. They're grim and they're glorious and they're full of ordinary people trying to do good things but failing horribly.
My name's Mike Shel. I'm author of the Iconoclast trilogy. Aching God and Sin Eater are out now, and I'm hoping that the last book, Idol's Fall, will be out by the end of April. So,
ML?
I'm ML Spencer. I'm author of the Rinwar Saga, and currently my newest book, Dragon Mage, is not quite as dark. I'm trying to reform, so let's see if I'm actually capable of that or not. People tell me it's still dark, but that's okay.
I'm Naslund. I'm the author of the Dragons of Terra trilogy. The first book is Blood of an Exile, and the second one is Sorcery of a Queen. The elevator pitch I always use is that it's an answer to the question of what would happen if you took the grumpiest, most cynical version of Wolverine from the comics and forced him to become a dragon slayer against his will. So that's what I'm doing.
All right, I'm Phil Williams. I'm the author of the Ordshaw series. They're contemporary fantasy thrillers. They lean more towards kind of horror, so they take place in the real world where you've got all sorts of monsters lurking in the background. So yeah, full of dark stuff. Yeah.
So the major theme here is dark stuff. Okay, got it. So just to kind of get a little bit of talking. So we're all tired of talking about heroes, clearly, because we just want to talk about evildoers and dark stuff. So why don't we ever get an anti-hero's perspective? After getting the crap stomped out of them. So you always have the good guy comes in. You got a baddie that's destroying a city or robbing a bank, if you want to talk about Joker or something. But you never you always see the hero taking him out, and then you don't really hear from the bad guy again until he heals up and comes back. So how does an antagonist get the motivation to continue coming back and doing evil things? What is there if your army is completely wiped out, but you still have a general left over? What is their motivation to continue coming back and trying to take over?
pathological hate.
If it's a good antagonist, don't forget an antagonist is always the hero of their own story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they have a good reason, a solid reason for coming back.
Yeah, I'd go with that one absolutely. The trick tends to be that they think that they're doing the right thing. So if they've lost, then they've got to keep fighting, try and keep going until they win.
Well, that great motivation, revenge. Let's go kill everyone who killed everyone that we care about. Everyone's the hero of their own journey, isn't it? I mean, it's. I don't think there's any bad person in history that woke up saying, "I'm going to do bad things today." It's just their idea of what's good is completely wrong.
I can't remember the show that I saw this on, but there are a couple of Nazis at a Nuremberg rally marching with torches, and one leans to the other and says, "Are we the bad guys?" So that kind of sense of the bad guys rarely seeing themselves as the bad guys, and whatever the motivation is. I think one thing you need to look at is pathology. And part of that comes from, I think, my own background and what I do in my day job. But looking at mutilated personalities, people who have a lot of anger, have a lot of hate, or lack the ability to put themselves in other people's shoes. So I think I think the revenge angle that Mike mentioned is what we see over and over again. It's like the need to dominate, and it doesn't matter what's left over afterwards, as long as I'm standing on the pile of ashes.
I mean, there's a Matt Damon film, Talented Mr. Ripley. There's a great line in that where I think it's nobody ever thinks of themselves as a bad person, no matter what they've done. And that probably ties right into this. But the best example I can think of is of an antagonist who sort of you see into his reasoning is Brandon Sanderson. I hate to bring on Sanderson this early, but there you go. His Mistborn saga, right at the very end, spoilers, you find out that the antagonist of the whole trilogy thought he was doing the right thing all the way through. He's just fucked up tremendously every single time. And now it's fallen to the protagonists of the trilogy to pull it back together again.
So. Oh no, I haven't finished reading that book.
Oh no!
It's a spoiler minefield.
Already you've ruined it.
God, 6 minutes in.
yeah. Gilda's in it too.
What about you, Ron? What do you think? Or did you dip out before you finished?
I was dipping out for some of it, but I'm just going to talk about a villain that I liked for lack of context and anything else. But no, it's sort of related, I think. One of my favorite villains has always been Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. This is not even fantasy, but I liked him because he had this crazy, rigid moral code, and he was definitely thinking he was doing the right thing. It was all completely insane. But my favorite part about him was that I feel like there's lots of heroes that wind up being villains in the sense that they'll be a hero when it's convenient, but when the going gets tough, they sort of, will do the easy thing and wind up being villains in that form. Anton Chigurh was he would be evil even when it was extremely inconvenient for him. And he upheld his moral code, even though it was this ridiculous string of murders and violence. And I always liked someone that crazy. And that sort of both twisted in the way they behave in the real world, but inside their own, kind of mind and logic and stuff, they're perfectly upstanding citizens. I think that's cool.
Well, to kind of branch off the question and to branch off what Brian was saying, who is a antagonist or a villain or somebody who's looked at as a villain that you is your favorite, I guess. Who is somebody that always sticks in your mind, or when you're writing, or even when you're not writing?
Well, I when I was 7 years old, I saw Star Wars, which obviously changed everything I never recovered. But I walked out of there just completely in love with Darth Vader, and I just he had the coolest costumes, he had the coolest lightsaber. He was unstoppable. And part of me, I didn't once you get to know the prequel stories and things like that, I didn't like it so much because I like this idea of this unstoppable monster coming after you that everyone has to rally against. And I think the best stories, the bad guys need that kind of sense that they're going to win. You have to go through the whole story believing that the odds are against your heroes. And I think the trouble when you get it's like the Superman pure hero thing is, they're always going to win. That the villain is there just to be beaten up for that episode. So I always try and have bad guys that feel unstoppable, that beating them is going to be impossible for our heroes to do. And that keeps you turning the pages, wondering what's going to happen. And that's why, cool costumes, cool swords.
Anybody else?
Okay, well, going from, as you brought up comics, I'd say going into comics, one of the best you've got there has to be the Joker. I think he's just one of the most compelling characters in any kind of medium, and I think it comes up again and again, the fact that he keeps coming up in different formats, and he's always compelling, just because he's so crazy in a way. He's charming because he's just so nuts that he's not even nasty. He's just got that kind of magnetism.
But again, I think it's one of those great villains that I love him just being this homicidal maniac. I think I struggled with the Joker film when you want to, poor guy is being mistreated, he's unloved, it kind of, to me, took away that kind of scariness of the monster appearing in your midst, because I was supposed to feel sympathy for him. I think the Joker's just brilliant as this just force of pure evil that turns up, the complete opposite of Batman.
Yeah, and I'm always interested to see the different takes.
Yeah,
because I
I
feel
like the
like
Joker movie didn't do it for me as much as I thought it would. Just getting all the nuance behind him and everything, or like I don't want to sympathize with the Joker. I want to just see him being a completely malevolent force, from someone else's perspective.
Well, you already kind of like him, don't you, for being that malevolent force? He doesn't need to be have you on his side. That's part of the charm, isn't it? He doesn't need you.
Well, so that's why dragons are amazing as a monster to fight, because they're just giant. They're going to come and eat you. Their motivation is, I'm going to eat you, maybe burn you first, but you don't need to know they grew up and they're unloved in the corner of whatever world they're in. They just fly in, and you need someone with a spear standing in the way trying to kill them.
Didn't need to know they were the runt in the family, and they got left behind when the family journeyed across the land. And
yeah,
I think that's the way, like those Prometheus and those Alien movies, where I don't want to see how the aliens were invented. You just want them to come along and destroy you.
Yeah, it feels like they kind of miss the point, isn't it? Because they take all the tension out of it. They're just like.
I like the clown from It.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Pennywise.
Yeah, Pennywise. I think I like Pennywise because you don't really get to see Pennywise's motivations. He's just consummately evil in every way, and you don't know why. It's because evil. I don't know, but it works for him. Just like the hotel in The Shining, works also. It's not exactly a persona, but it kind of is. So.
But it makes me think though about appetite, and I think that's the way the sense that I got from it was that the whatever it was ate fear, right? And you get back to this motivation why people or alien clowns do what they do, and you get to need to appetite. And do you allow your appetite to override any sort of moral qualms? And that's where we see the villains coming from, is that it doesn't matter how this impacts other people.
But do you not think maybe it can get too simplistic if you do that? It makes sense to me because it, as in Pennywise, makes sense to me because its appetite, whatever it is, needs to consume to survive, and that's the survival instinct. But if you take that to say, I don't know, your stereotypical Dark Lord, what do they do the next day? When Sauron has covered the world in darkness, when Lord Fowl has tainted and destroyed everything, well, then what? What's the motivation doesn't make sense going forward.
They have
make the assumption that it's irrational. It's a rational motivation that there's anything beyond. Well, going back to Joker in the Chris Nolan movie, some men just want to see the world burn.
Well, what was fascinating me is the hangers-on. Best example that springs to mind is Doctor Strange, where the ultimate big bad just wants to destroy everything. That's his malevolent force. That's it. So fine. But what about all the followers who know that the world's going to end, but they're coming along to play anyway because they'll be fine, honest, they'll be great. And you see it so often in so many books and so many films that, we've been promised a way out. We know there's going to be the world's going to explode. Well, we'll be all right. It's all right. It's fine.
They're doing it for good pay and healthcare. Right?
They got a 401k matching plan that you can't beat. That 6% match is worth it,
Yeah, but I think that's why a lot of the time, stormtroopers wear helmets so you can't see they're ordinary people, because really you'd feel bad about the Death Star being blown up and the 2 billion workers on there that got vacuumed into space. I mean, it's you have those faceless enemies that you hate, but they probably all believe they're in a doing a good thing. There was and I won't again spoil the Mandalorian too much, but there was a great scene where there were some Empire people arguing over, the terrorists that blew up the Death Star and how they lost their friends there. I mean, it's one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And I'm sure all the people that were working for Trump all thought they were doing the right thing. It's, but they do. They don't wake up and go, "I'm going to have a evil breakfast," and and go off and be evil. They think they're changing the world for good. It's
I
just
think a lot of them probably thought there's a small bad thing is not going to be too bad, and then it spiraled out of control. I think it's like...
Are you suggesting the Emperor had "Make the Empire Great Again" hats? Is that what's going on?
I'm surprised that has not happened yet. Oh man, and Graham, I am interested to know, because that's also saying, like, what's the next thing? So because we never really see that. I mean, I guess you saw it a little bit in the not Endgame, but the previous installment of the Avengers movie. You got to see Thanos after spoiler alert, snaps his finger, and you see him go to this this utopia where it's just all fields of flowers and meadows, and he's done his business. And then you kind of see what happens, a little bit, after once they reassemble and so forth. But you don't really see that in books or movies or TV shows. You don't see what happens at the end and what the next day looks like. It's just the next day.
Yeah.
Well, think about too that you brought up Trump. So
sorry.
It's like I was thinking,
he's just my ready, example of evil.
So Mike did it. We have a Brit do it, so we're okay. What kind of planning was there beyond the next 24 hours? Yeah. And then the 24 hours after that? I mean, I don't think we're necessarily dealing with great thinkers sometimes. We're talking about villains. We're talking about oftentimes people with need for immediate gratification and being driven by kind of some what we think of as base impulses, whether it's revenge or greed or whatever the case may be. And so we'll say, oh, this flu's not any worse than the regular flu, and it'll be gone in the next few weeks. And there was plenty of information there to suggest that no, this indeed is a lot bigger than that. Why would you put out some lie like that you were going to be found out for such a short time later? Well, not a great planner. Not really thinking about what happens the day after.
Because there's so many villains that rise to power through, months and years of machinations and careful planning. And I'm trying to think there must be some where there's like a villain who rose to power kind of by accident, like didn't really think that they would actually succeed, but they did, and now they're in charge of this huge empire. So nothing comes to mind, but I think that would be a funny story to read where they kind of just didn't think it would work, but it did, and now they're all powerful and evil.
And they actually wake up in the morning going, "What have I done? What?"
What do you think, Emil?
I was thinking of Daenerys actually, from Game of Thrones, and like the day after. What would the day after look like if Daenerys actually brought her evil empire to the whole world? Thinking that she was spreading good. It would be mass oppression everywhere. People getting blasted with dragon fire, but to her that would be a beautiful world.
Yeah, but you could say the same thing about Cersei. I mean, give Cersei some dragons and she's no better or worse. But yeah. I mean, what I liked most about Game of Thrones was that you could understand the motivations behind all of them. Cersei was very clearly, her thought process was that if I don't do this, someone else is going to do it to me. If I don't screw these guys over, if I don't go up to Winterfell and raze it to the ground, they're going to come south and get me. So that's the whole point of it.
See, I didn't actually see Cersei as a villain. I actually totally identified with Cersei. I understood her motivations.
Okay.
She's a powerless woman, and she's the only way she possibly has power. in order to defend her kids. A lot of her motivation came from that.
Mm-hmm.
He doubles down too of like, all right, I've got enemies against me. It might not be that I have a few personality defects to work through in therapy. I'm just going to double down and try to take over the entire world. I'm going to continue down this path and assume everyone else is wrong. I feel like they're so funny too when you look at Cersei and Tyrion, because I feel like I just feel like I'm saying her name, both of their names different. But anyway, I feel like Tyrion was so interesting because he, you know, I wouldn't call him a villain, but when he sometimes takes power through, you know, means that aren't on the above board area. But I remember there were these scenes and chapters where they point out that he's a very good, like, bureaucratic administrator. Like, he's good with making sure the sewers of the city work. Like, he likes the mundane aspects of having power. Whereas Cersei, I feel like it wasn't as overt, but she wanted power. But once she had it, she didn't want to actually be like a leader. She didn't have a grand plan of how she's going to make cities and bureaucracy a better place. And I feel like that, like, in my mind, slips you more into like a true villain versus someone who maybe like is willing to take power through shitty means, but then they're going to like make sure the sewage system is on the up and up. Like, you know, there's going to be a good reason for it. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's a cool difference between the two siblings there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also looking at Tyrion's reaction when Daenerys went full dragon Hitler, you know,
Love it.
that, you know, that was okay. She'd crossed a line. You know, Tyrion was willing to do some shady things, but that was a you know, too far.
Right. So you can hide in a latrine and shoot your father in the ass, but no, that's
yeah, exactly.
You know, when you go full dragon Hitler,
you know, we're all writing that down now. We're all getting.
I try to expect that in the book in the next year.
I'm copywriting that.
Wow. Goodness gracious. All right, so a little bit of a general discussion question. What is the biggest challenge when writing villains or heroes, or one or the other?
Everything part of it.
Okay, we'll say villains first then, since this is anti-hero chat. Nobody.
One thing that took me a while to get right. I have this very kind of mad scientist villain, and his broader strokes and broader plan was pretty straightforward because mad scientists just want a mad scientist. Like, he's just always kind of looking for the next experiment. But I really struggled for a while with his like just moment to moment behavior. What I wound up doing to kind of get it right was sort of channel the most like evil parts of my own behavior. And I did it, you know, he's the scientist guy, so he's very analytical. He just treats people like things. So I started trying to channel the thing that I do for my day job, which I have a day job in tech. So I do a lot of things with numbers and analytics and basically reducing people to pie charts and graphs and stuff like that. And so when I was trying to like apply that part of my own kind of behavior to a person, it worked a lot better. So like finding my lowest functioning self in day-to-day things and then pouring that into a character took me a while to do, or to realize that I needed to do, to prevent them from coming off as like caricatures and super stiff people. So that was what I struggle with the most, is like you establish a villain who's relatively standard, but you got to fill in the color with unique stuff, and that wasn't easy for me.
Yeah, my bad guy in We Are the Dead, his superpower or his magic power is the ability to heal. So you cut yourself, he can come along, put his hand on it, and make it all better, which I thought was like the nicest power anyone could have. But he enjoys pain, so he actually enjoys torturing people, and you know, and then he heals them, and then he gets to do it all over again. So it's, you know, non-stop torment, and he was just fun to write because he was so twisted and perverted in the way he thought, and he was just having a good time. He didn't think he was being bad. He was just someone who really enjoyed doing his job, and I think that kind of madness is a lot easier to write than an ordinary person who's trying to just do the right thing and get through the next day. I'm a bit worried when people actually say that he's their favorite character, though.
Secretly.
It's just so great because he could be, the greatest doctor in the world, but he decided to go the other way.
Well, Hannibal Lecter is another example of someone who's he's a brilliant psychiatrist, and people, no pun intended, ate up that character, and just were just so drawn to that, unmitigated evil, absolutely, except of course his motivations, he only ate people who were rude. So as long as you weren't rude, you were okay with him.
You got to have a code.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the code, I think the code, John Wick isn't a horrible assassin, but he has a code, that you hurt his dog, he's going to come after you, or you steal his car. And a lot of these anti-heroes, it's that code that allows you to root for them. But if you think about him, he's a horrible, horrible person that made a fortune by assassinating people for who knows what reason.
They were all meat to dogs.
Yeah.
Every one of them. SPCA blacklist. I think there's a balance that needs to be struck. I think that you can really screw up your villain. If you humanize them too much, then if you make it too easy to relate to, then they cease to be the villain. They're like the pseudo hero. So you need to find a balance between making them just this two-dimensional moustache twirling bad guy and making them just another hero with a different motivation. And I've done both. I've had the implacable bad guy that you don't really get to see that much as to what the motivations are. And I've had the other guy that by the end of the book, by the end of Faithless, then you're practically understanding what it is driving the antagonist of that story, the sense of betrayal and bitterness and so on and so forth. But you've got to pull back a little bit. At least I feel that you do. You've got to pull back a little bit, because if you go too far, then he's just another hero going another way.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I'd go back to Mike's earlier example of Darth Vader. I think the original trilogy does that perfectly, because we get little snippets. Like every now and again, you see Darth Vader as this sort of unstoppable force, but when he does get a chance to stop and talk, you do get these ideas that he has certain principles he thinks he wants, and especially when he's alone with Luke. Just in a couple of lines, you get this idea he has an ambition, and you get that human angle, but it totally doesn't undercut how horrible and scary he is. When you get into the original trilogy, suddenly he's this skinny whelp, and you're like...
But the whole power of that line of "I'm your father" it only really works because he's so evil and Luke's so good.
Yeah,
that is like the most awful thing that could be said. It's not like, "Oh, Dad, you're back." It's just like, I would rather kill myself than have you as my father.
Yeah. So it undercuts that when you get his whole history.
One of the things I think I was struck by, I was 12 when the first Star Wars came out. So if you can imagine, the kind of crack that was. The third movie with Return of the Jedi, when Luke saves his father because he tosses the Emperor over the rail. Everything's okay now. You've killed billions of people, but because you did this one thing, all the slate's clean, quite clean again. Yeah. And that always struck me as a little hard to accept.
Could have done like there should be a fan fiction of this where Darth Vader doesn't die after the Death Star blows up, and so now Luke has to reconcile, like, you're gonna put your dad in like prison for war crimes, defend him,
family therapy. Luke,
really awkward Christmas dinner.
His son.
Yeah. Does Luke just go down the dark side trying to defend his father, or why? I bet there is a fan fiction of that. There's no way someone hasn't thought of that already.
I'm gonna write it. I'm gonna write the family therapy with Leia and Darth Vader.
Vader the therapy years. Yeah.
The one where Vader's on trial, and they call Luke as a witness. You have to testify against your own dad. Yeah, I haven't read anything where he continues on. I've just read it's all like fluff between movies, or all the Vader stories I've read, and most of them it's just him continuing to kill people, but doing it for good means, right? So, Emil, did you have anything to add to about writing villains?
No, I think it's pretty much all been said. I mean, you have to make your villain realistic enough so that they're just not a mustache twirler. I do like what Graham said, that if you go too far the other way, you've gone into kind of like an anti-villain. And anti-villains are really interesting. Honestly, they are. But you also have to have a real villain if you have an anti-villain.
Gotcha. What do y'all think, or what is the difference between a villain and an anti-hero? Or are they the same thing?
Marketing.
Anybody?
I guess the anti-hero has to have an arc, doesn't he? An anti-hero tends to take you somewhere. A villain is more playing against the protagonist. They're in the way of the arc, whereas the anti-hero, you're following them on their arc. You could take the same character from different perspectives and different story and have one as a villain and one as an anti-hero. It's about the perspective of the story, isn't it? Who are they playing against?
Yeah, it probably just comes down to depth, really. If you go any further into the villain, then you'll start to relate, you'll start to understand fully the motivation in the background, and then they will cease to be really a villain.
So I feel that superheroes are just too super. So the last couple of Avengers movies, for example, they revealed that they can be beaten, but most have it pretty easy. Do you feel there should be more of a balance in good versus evil, or should good always prevail because that's just how it is?
That's a good one.
Everyone's waiting for someone else to drop down again.
There's a bad snowstorm in Colorado, so it's screwing with my internet connection.
I think the good needs to prevail in an interesting way. And I think that's kind of what's been kind of lost with the superhero movies. You've got the superheroes defeating the supervillains, but by just virtue of them being a superhero. I like the older superhero movies where they actually had to be a little creative and actually beat them through, using their intellect, not just their big hammer. So.
Yeah, I think everything goes around in cycles, right? And I think at the moment, I think superhero movies are so popular because the world is so dark and messed up in reality. So you need that escapism. You want to see good win and believe that there's hope at the end of it. In the same way, in the 50s, you had cowboy westerns and the hero in his white hat and John Wayne coming along and doing his thing. I think, and then if you look back in more recent times when, things have been great, the anti-hero has been much more popular because we can deal with these kind of grey figures coming and doing things. I think our entertainment really reflects a lot of what's going on around us and what we seek to do this. I've struggled writing while this pandemic's been going on because it's hard going into writing about a dark world when I look out the window and I'm frightened about what's going on. So I end up doing kids' books because I need to feel lightness and all that kind of stuff. And I think everything that we do reflects what goes on around us. And the Marvel movies are a great example of that. Just because you do need to see Captain America standing up and beating Thanos over the head with Thor's hammer, and you're going to cheer at that point.
Anybody else have anything to add?
Sorry, kill the conversation.
No, I agree with it. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned I've been working on my third book in the trilogy for basically the whole pandemic year, and it's a dark, unpleasant period for most of the characters, but I wrote a whole plotline that I then deleted. That was just people hanging out in an inn, having no problems, and just like eating food and going shopping and stuff like that.
You read my book.
Yeah, I wrote like it was back in like March and April, I think, when everything was so scary and it was very unclear if anything was going to be okay ever again. And I delete the entire thing. It was completely useless to the actual book, but it felt good at the time.
I literally
There's a
bailed
bonus chapter.
I literally bailed on Grimdark during the pandemic. I was right in the middle of a Grimdark series, and I'm like, I can't do this right now. So I just took off out of my series, wrote epic fantasy, heroic epic fantasy, and now I somehow have to go back and write the finish to that Grimdark series, but I couldn't write it this year. Couldn't do it.
It's funny, as a counterpoint, I think I've gone the other way. I've written much darker stuff during this period. I've just written really dark horror stories. And I don't know, part of that's fueling it. But I'd still go towards the end up aiming towards some kind of happy ending, don't you? And I guess a tangent I'd get in there is it's part of the reason that people enjoy series, especially when you've got a trilogy and maybe there'll be a happy ending at the end, but you can get that satisfaction of the books in the middle where bad things just happen, and it gives us that kind of strong impact of the story, and we know, well, maybe in the next book things will be all right, which is why the second book's in a trilogy can often end on a real downer.
And I guess, like what Emil was saying, it kind of depends on what your headspace was last year, and continuing now, because even as a reader, it was hard to read a lot of Grimdark because I had all these series that I wanted to read or listen to, and I just couldn't fathom sitting down and going, gosh, this is terrible things happening to these people. And then you look out the window, there's terrible things happening outside. And you look at the news and go, there is nothing good happening today. I think I'm just going to go take a nap. It just wasn't good. So hopefully, that starts to get better. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, and I can imagine it's hard to write a villain in those circumstances, because you just want to go, can I just write a hero story and everything just be flowers and rainbows and sunshine and everybody gets along? And so.
I heard someone else say something about it. I was blocked for a good part of the past year. I mean, badly blocked. And it sounds like, Mike, I think you mentioned that it's been tough to write during this period for you too.
Yeah, I mean, I was on a call with some other Galance authors the other week, and the first question everyone asked was, "Are you writing?" And then the relief when everyone said no, and there were some, quite experienced authors there. It's difficult, and I think especially when all your routines and things like that go out the window as well. But yeah, it's hard going into a dark place, making bad things happen when it's happening to people around you. It's a challenge. And I think what would be interesting is to see the books that are coming out of this. As Emil said, you've written that amazing epic fantasy book, and it's a complete change from what you used to do. And by the looks of it, everyone's loving it. So it'll be interesting to see what other books then come from it all.
So there's another question from the audience, and I mean, I know we're strictly talking about villains, but that's what we're just going to do, unfortunately. So even though we've been finding it hard to write about villains, but are your favorite villains to write those that are completely opposite from the hero or main character, or those that reflect them in some way?
Both, but I think it's maybe a little bit easier to be more interesting if they're kind of not foils of each other, but are kind of related in their perspective. I actually I haven't actually done this already, but I do think about it every once in a while when I'm thinking of new characters. There's this thing called an Enneagram test, which is sort of like a personality test, but it's centered around kind of like workplace behavior. That's what it's specialized for. And I had to do it for a job, and I kind of, was giving it the side eye when I showed up. But I found it to be pretty helpful just generally as a personality test. But the cool thing that they do is they give you like your highest functioning version of yourself and then your lowest functioning version of yourself. And I remember mine was like highest functioning, I'd be like this empathetic person who sees all different perspectives. My lowest functioning version of myself is an agoraphobic, basically, who is afraid to go outside and can't handle anything. And I feel like for like matching like a villain with a hero, it's fun to like think of that, like, you know, this is one person at their highest functioning version, the other person at their lowest, and like messing around with those. And I've always wanted to like pull up all the different Enneagram personalities. There are 9, and like pick a hero and a villain and a foil based on like just screwing around with how high functioning or low functioning different people are. So yeah, I like them to be related a little bit if I can swing it.
You see, my lowest function, if I did that as a bad guy, they'd stay in bed all day reading comic books, and there wouldn't be any evil empire building going on.
Anybody else?
In my Rin Wars books, definitely my hero was very tempted to become a villain. There was a lot of the villain in the hero. And I really like doing that, where there's, you know, the hero can find admirable qualities in the villain. And it's very tempting and seductive to kind of go in that direction.
You can get versions of that scene from Heat where Al Pacino and Robert De Niro have coffee together. Like I love when moments like that happen in fiction. So
You might have kind of mirror images of each other, though. In the Faithless book and the sequel I'm writing now, really they're both searching for the truth, just going about it by different ways. So it really depends on your perspective as to, I mean, if you're really fucked up, you've had a drink, then, you know, you might be confused as to which is which, but they're both essentially searching for the same thing. It just depends on where your moral compass lies.
I find sometimes I've got villains where it's not when you get away from the ones that are just doing something for an evil purpose, looking for evil. I find sometimes I emerge with a villain where I've got a kind of a version of a character who's just taken something to a slight extreme. Like my kind of main villain-ish character in my first 3 Oddshaw books is very similar to one of the other characters if you pay close attention, and you gradually realise actually she's just that much worse that it comes to the point where it becomes a problem. And I find that quite an interesting dynamic to play with, because especially I've got an unpublished story, I've got something similar where the mentor becomes the antagonist. And it's the idea that actually the same values that the hero's got, if you take them a bit further, they can become villainy. I find that interesting.
So I've got a question from the audience. This ought to be interesting and a little bit humorous. It says, I like to think the characters in books are the kids of the authors. A great villain provides needed material for a great hero, and when the hero happens to die in a story, it's usually a glorious end and easier to accept. How hard or easy is it as your parent to kill the main villain? That's a fantastic question.
It's a very good point. I think it's really hard sometimes because I don't like killing any characters, especially my bad ones, because they're the most interesting. So yeah, it's difficult.
Well, my books have a really high body count. I think, and again, to me, it's interesting in no one is safe during this, and just because you think someone is the hero or the main star of the book, it doesn't mean they're going to make it all the way to book 3. And I like that unpredictability about it. But I think you have to care about each character when they die, and I don't think any of them are. The easy ones are the red shirts that you just get wiped out because people are dying. But whether it's a hero or a villain, and you've told their story and their consequences to what they're doing, the death should have meaning and impact. There's. I can't spoil what happens in one, but someone dies in one of my books, and I really miss them, because they've been with me for 4 years now. Yeah. And I know them, so they are, I wouldn't know. I don't know if they're my kids, but they've been living in my brain, and they're parts of the story where you're going along. You go, oh well, if only so and so was here, they would be doing this. But unfortunately, they got their head cut off 2 books ago. But no, you've got to care about them. It's got to have meaning, and that's where the difficulty comes. I think just wiping people out for the sake of it is just pointless.
Yeah. I like to shift the goalposts a couple of times. You'd be reading my books, you think you identify who the bad guy is, and then as time goes on, you realize actually maybe they're not the bad guy, and there's this other bad guy lurking behind. But I'm terrible at killing off my ultimate bad guy. I just kind of put him in timeout.
Give him a couple of slaps on the wrist.
Yeah.
No, but the there is going to be a big fight at the end of book 3 of mine, but I don't know what's going to happen at the end of it. I purposely haven't plotted out who's going to win, who's going to survive, who's going to do anything, because I want to feel that it's a natural thing that's happening as a result of the story.
Yeah.
And no bets that it's going to be a happy ending, but
it's a scary thing to contemplate as well, because if they are the ultimate bad guy, if they're Sauron, for example, and you kill that character off, well, then your story's done.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, all right, you can go back and revisit your world and go off on tangents and see what this guy did and what that guy did, and hey, what's that island over there? But your ultimate story is finished, and that's, as an author, that's kind of a scary thing to contemplate. So to wipe them out completely with a line that a lot of the time I don't want to cross.
My first book, the first draft, a character died, and after going over it for about a year, I decided, no, I like this other character more. I have to kill that character. And so ended up changing something that happened at the end, because I thought it was more important for that death to have greater impact. And that's changed, of course, what's happened in the books after it. So yeah, where does Kill Your Darlings come from?
Evil.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that. I've done that. I did that too with my second book, where I had one character died, sort of, then a character's going to have a big storyline in the third book. And I was then working on the third book and realizing that I made the wrong decision. And luckily, the death was pretty easy to switch in the copy edits phase of things. Like, there wasn't that many pages devoted to it. So like it didn't screw me over that much. But there should be a word for or an acronym for like FOMO, but the feeling you get when you've killed a character in a book that's in print and you can't change, and you come up with the perfect plotline for them later in the third book. So I feel like that's one thing. I didn't think through the long-term implications of some of the people that I killed, and it largely worked out just fine. But that's a good lesson that is good to not learn the hard way.
Yeah. No, there are lots of things I did in book 1 that are plaguing me in book 3.
Yeah.
Mainly around geography and things like that. And you're just I think Justin Coole's an amazing author, and his books, Master of Sorrows and Master Artificer, are great books on how a good person becomes bad. But he spent 10 years doing the world building before writing those books, whereas I kind of make it up as I go along. I don't worry about what money's called until someone needs to pull a coin out. Yeah. So, you got someone like him who's got this world, and he's not going to make those mistakes because he's planned it so well. But I could also I can walk away from my world at the end of it and start something new, but I haven't spent 10 years planning it. If I was Justin, I'd be writing 15 books in that world, just because I have to make use of all the planning that I did.
I'm pretty sure his series is
isn't it?
Well, it has to be after all that time,
And he's writing 900 to 1,000 page books, and they're coming out annually. But yeah, I think he's writing a pretty long series. But yeah, I can't imagine that much.
He's like the opposite. I'm at one end and he's at the other. I'm a complete pantser when it comes to it, and he's got a plan.
Much like putting two cities, 10 miles apart in book 1 can completely screw up something you want to do in book 3, and you just have to live with the decisions that you've made. Yeah, I don't plan stuff out very far either.
So another question from the audience. When starting a new story, do you start with developing your villain and the challenge that needs to be overcome, or does the villain come into being based on what your protagonist arc will be?
There's
always this time.
I'd hedge my bets and say it varies. Sometimes I've got an idea where a story's going to go in the end, and if that's the case, then I kind of know where the villain needs to be. But most of the time, I'm following the protagonist and seeing where their arc goes. So where they get to at the end is kind of putting me where the villain needs to be. So with the latter mostly for that, I'd say. I mean, I've developed the villain as a character, but in terms of the way the plot goes, yeah, I'd be led more by the protagonist.
Yeah, I mean, my series starts off, and I just had this, and I won't mention the Orange Man again, but after he won, and other stuff happened in the UK that I didn't agree with, to me it felt like the bad guys had won, and I was wondering where the heroes were that were going to come save the day. And then I started thinking about the books that I read, and we're all used to Sauron trying to conquer the world, and Aragon's there stopping them and things like that. But I couldn't remember reading any stories where the bad guy had come along, invaded and won, and then dealing with the consequences of life in that situation. So that's literally, I start off with the premise of the war's over, the bad guys have won, what are you going to do about it? And it was just, again, ordinary people in those situations. You know, World War II, if you're French and the Germans have invaded, you've got to try and live with that, you've got to try and deal with that situation. And that, to me, became a really interesting area to start exploring. And then, who are those ordinary people? So, you know, you put a coward into a war story, and that, to me, is a lot more interesting than having Arnold Schwarzenegger wade through a war story. Because, you know, they've got some really awful choices to make, and doing the right thing doesn't come easy to them. So that from that, all the development of of who the characters are became a lot easier. You know, my main character, I tried being a you know, quick-witted, true hero, and she refused to do anything. And that's when I realised she was a coward, and her refusal to do the action and to fight came from that personality, and that's what she does all through the book until there's no choice but to fight.
To start with a very kind of narrow view and premise, like you know, I kicked off the Dragons of Terra series just with this idea that there's a guy with a really bad hangover who has to go kill a dragon. I thought nothing else through, and just wrote that scene and kind of let it build from there. And I'm finally in the trilogies. My part of it is almost done, so I'm in the spot where I can start thinking of, you know, what I might want to do next, and I'm approaching it in exactly the same manner, for better or for worse. Just like all these, like, really, like, very kind of like narrow problems for a protagonist to solve, and then from there, there's lots of like growth. But yeah, I definitely start with just a protagonist with a big problem, and then let the villain kind of grow from there, whatever it's going to be.
But it's another character with a hangover.
A character with a hangover just thrown off the sky. Yeah, there we go.
Hey Mel, you got any thoughts?
Well, again, like when I wrote Rin Wars, it was a very morally great book. So I did not want my villains too far away from my heroes. I wanted them kind of both on the same line, kind of sometimes switching back and forth over crossing that line. So I definitely made my villain, you know, to play off of the hero's, you know, weaknesses and vice versa. And so, yeah, I definitely kind of go in that direction.
Mike, Graham, any thoughts?
I don't plan, really. It makes my editor cry and scream and throw things at me, but no, I sort of make it go along. Yes, yelling in the room. But when I wrote my Bay trilogy, really the whole notion of it was that I wanted a world of conflict with itself, just basically an international war, and then I wanted the third factor of it being this mythical race that's returning to a world that's completely forgotten about them, and they're actually the real threat. So that's the premise I started with, and then the characters just came in to fill it. I think with me, certainly, it's a mistake to think that I in any way know what I'm doing at any point. And the story is not as surprising to me as it is to the reader because it's just appearing on the page. I read back and think that I actually write this. I don't know where these words come from. So my characters develop, all of my characters, be them the villain or the protagonist, just develop organically as needed. It makes for an editing nightmare, hence the scars and the bruises and everything else. But yeah, that's how they work, and it seems to work so far.
It's like you have editors' comment coming in from the side. You better tell them how brilliant I am. No?
All right. So when you're writing villains, what are some of your biggest influences? And I've asked this question before, but in different aspects, because I've heard of writers bringing in, more probably for thrillers than really for fantasy, but bringing in people like in their life that, maybe 20, 30 years ago in high school, they brought those characters to life. But do you insert any characteristics of people in your own life into your villains?
I've killed so many people from my real life in my books. Some of them thinly disguised, but I don't think they've read the books, so I don't get away with it. But yeah, I've killed a lot of people.
The hardest thing I have is coming up with names for characters. So in my books, that they're all people I know. The variations on their names get named through characters, and there are a few book bloggers and things like that in books 2 and 3, just as thank yous. But I needed a name as well. So like Nils is in book 2.
Oh, that's awesome. I love Nils.
Yeah. So and there are a few others. Timmy's in book 3, but when you need names, I'll go through who do I know who has a fancy sounding name, and suddenly they're in it, or can I twist it?
David's just too normal. Who else writes people they know in their books?
I feel like I've never I feel like I start with like generic templates, like mad scientist or like Campbell or something like that. And I've never put someone else that I know, like tried to pull from their personality, but I do try to like pick from my like lowest functioning self and the perspectives about myself that I like the least. I try to put those into my villains. That works pretty well.
Bill, Mike, Emil, anything?
I tend to avoid going for people I know. I don't know, more because I find it more interesting to let the characters develop themselves. So I don't try and base them on people. But I do tend to sometimes I'll take inspiration from other mediums. Sometimes, like from say an actor in a film or something, I might try and take their aesthetic and put it in. But often it's something quite random. I've got a character in the Orchard book that's based on a guy who plays a lot of bit cop parts in British dramas. And if I told you who he was, you wouldn't know. But I see him pop up every now and again in like BBC dramas, and he's a great character for these books. But you wouldn't recognise him probably from the book either, because by the time I've read it, it's something else. But as a starting point, sometimes I'll get inspired that way.
I don't think I could do that. I have a hard time like just even putting like people into books that aren't completely in my brain. I remember like hearing somewhere, okay, you gotta like go sit at Starbucks and just look at people and see what these people do, people watching, and put those characteristics into your character. So I sat there at Starbucks for like an hour going, nobody's doing anything interesting.
You should go to the DMV. Yeah, I feel like people watching at the DMV is where you see the villains come out.
Behind the counter.
Yeah, exactly.
But then, Brian, do you still, or I guess you don't really anymore, but I know before the pandemic, you used to ride the bus and write. So I'm sure you had plenty of people watching stories from that, because there's a definite type of person that reads the bus.
There was some, especially people losing their composure over the bus being delayed. I do. I don't think I've incorporated that behavior in any of my books, but I like seeing otherwise normal people or people who clearly have their lives together, like in a business suit, and they're like maybe taking work on the bus, and then like there's an unexpected delay, and to see them completely lose their shit in a public setting, I think is one, hilarious, and just sort of like telling of no person is as wrapped up as they seem like, you know, like I think everyone is a hop, skip, and a jump away from an unpredictable event happening that turns them into a demon. So maybe I don't have enough faith in people, but.
But I mean, you know, ML said the DMV. I mean, you got to think like the airport. You know, standing behind somebody who's writing a check at the cash register.
Yeah.
You know, stuff like that would just make a normal person snap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can tell a lot by someone by how they handle airports and DMVs, right?
All right. So another question to the audience, and I kind of had a question in regards to morally gray, but. Do you prefer to write characters who are clearly good or evil, or do you prefer those who fall in the gray area between? And which do you prefer to read?
I absolutely prefer to write characters who fall in the gray between. Large premise of all of my books is that question lurking in the back of both mine and the reader's mind. If it comes right down to it, how far would you go? If it's a choice between, and no one's watching, if it's a choice between you and them, and one of you's got to die, then what are you going to do to save yourself, or to make sure that it's not you that suffers? Yeah, that's definitely the way that I work with a lot of my characters.
I think I prefer to write good guys who might be pressed into doing things that they regret, that violate their values because of the circumstances and how they wrestle with that, how that impacts them. And I think that I'm really more gravitating to that in my own reading as well. And it could be, again, as Mike and some others mentioned earlier, the world is so dark right now. I want to have someone I can root for without caveat, you know, without some, well, despite this, I'm rooting for this. It's like I root for this guy and I'm not embarrassed because I want these people to win and I want good to prevail. So
I agree 100%. I think that the challenge is the reality is no one's perfect, and you can write the hero as being perfect and they therefore become boring. I think we've all got our flaws. We're all terrible sometimes, or a lot, according to my wife. But you know, we all have these moments of doing greatness and doing badness, and I think that for me that's the interest. I like heroes that do great things, but I need to believe that they have flaws and they're human in many ways. I think that's probably why I don't like Superman, because A, he's not human, and he's perfect, and he's got every power in the world to beat every possible danger that comes along, and that's not exciting. So putting real people in situations with their flaws and faults and things like that, to me, is really, really, that's why I like reading, that's why I like writing. You know, I love the fact that Brian's character is a drunk who, you know, doesn't want to be this dragon slayer, but that's what he is. So he's the best dragon slayer doing it. But, you know, there's all this sort of antagonism and angst in him. And that's what makes him exciting. And if his powers are going to kill him in the end, even better, you know. But that to me is what makes it exciting.
Well, thank you, Mike. As per our usual agreement, I'll Venmo you that $20.
You said it was $50.
Yes, your prices are up. But I mean, one of the fun things about writing, you know, epic fantasy with a big cast of characters is you can kind of do all of them. You know, I've got some characters who are objectively good, I would say, although I try to put them in situations where they're forced to make tough decisions, but their moral compass is maybe not at hazard. And then I have other characters who are constantly, you know, in that gray area and doing things that are good and doing things that are bad and not really feeling the way you might expect someone to. And then I have some characters who are just straight up evil the whole time. They're not trying to do the good thing. The good thing is a myth to them. And it's fun to just sort of have this big mixture of people in different situations. But for what I like to read, I'll always like like Gray leaning towards more villain. Like the Hound is my favorite character in fiction, I think, and I love rereading his scenes, even though when he does bad things, I don't think of them as bad, and I think that's the true magic of him. I'm like, nah, that's about right. Like I'd do the same thing if I was in your situation, Sander. And I get like kind of I don't know what the right German Schadenfreude word is for it, but sympathizing with like a morally gray character and his bad behavior is my favorite thing to read.
But you mentioned the Hound, and I was actually thinking of the same character, and really seeing him as someone who could be a hero, right? And in some situations, I'm thinking specifically of the HBO show, he was the hero, or the avatar of vengeance, or justice. So
yeah, and they kind of like moved him more towards the hero slot, which I think George R. R. Martin is going to do anyway. But I remember I was on like kind of like a first date, and we were watching. It was when Game of Thrones was coming out, and it was the episode we watched was the chicken scene. We're in the inn where he kills all those people and says, "I'm going to eat every fucking chicken in this room," and I could not stop laughing. I loved it. I like made the person I was on the date with watch it over again. And that we never saw each other again. I think she was alarmed.
but that seems great. Who hasn't been in a bar where there's been some a-hole saying stuff, and the Hound comes out with great one-liners. Yeah. It's all that thing. If I was brave enough, I would have said that. But he can back it up, so he says it all, and then he's going to eat all their chickens. It's great.
Yeah, it's just like pure joy in my book. I love it.
ML, Phil.
Well, I very much don't go towards good or evil with my characters. I prefer to I try and treat them like people, and what's the circumstance, what's the situation that's going to steer them one way or the other. So I don't try to think of them in terms of are they naturally good or naturally bad, just kind of how they behave. This is what I find kind of interesting. Honestly, I haven't really got any just pure good characters in my book. I've got some that lean towards evil because they are just chaotic. But even then, they're not doing it for bad sake. They're doing it because it's fun to be chaotic. But I think probably at least in my Orchard books, the most purely good character in that is a guy who hunts monsters, but even he does it because it's fun, because he gets drunk and has something to do with the lads on an evening. But he's also probably the least interesting character. I think he's probably the least popular as well. So.
I think for me, it just depends on if there's a pandemic or no pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I would have said like one of my favorite characters in all of fiction would be Gerald Terrence from the Coldfire trilogy, who is definitely an anti-hero. He's a very interesting anti-hero. And I really, really enjoyed writing my anti-hero. Post-pandemic, I want a hero. I want somebody who really is trying to do good, who means well, and is going to be, just rock solid to the core, a sweetheart. I don't know.
I gotcha. So I've got one last question. I'm gonna let G.R. Matthews do his last question, but he says, "Are all the worst villains human?" He says, "I'm trying to think of villains that are actually the monsters, like the orcs, even villains which are evil elves are humanized. So based on your knowledge of fiction and television and film, doesn't it typically turn out that humans are usually the worst villains?"
I could go back to one.
That was my answer. You go for it.
One thought I had much earlier when Mel brought up The Shining. I thought an example that goes with that is Hill House. I think is an amazing villain because Hill House is just a place that's just pure evil, and there's no kind of reason behind it, no backstory that explains it. It's just evil, and I think that works brilliantly well. But I think you need a particular kind of story for that.
I think the most effective villains are evil because most effective villains are human because again, you can relate to it. You can look at that person and say, my God, you're a human being with a conscience, and yet somehow you manage to do these things, and that comes back to the viewer or the reader, and you can feel that much more keenly than you could. Yeah, okay, this flying lizard came down and torched a town and ate all the babies. That's not really interesting. As you know,
Yeah.
I mean, even taking it back to real life, putting yourself in Hitler's brain, that somehow he managed to justify that's much more horrifying to me as a reader and a viewer than the scaly lizard with the munchies.
Yeah, but I think, you know, the first fear you have as a child normally is about the monster under the bed. You know, that very basic fear of the unknown. And that's where I think like Alien and the Terminator do really well, is because it plays on that really basic fear of, you know, the big bear that's coming to eat you, the dragon that's coming to eat you, the alien. Those stories are eternal because they go back to the very basic stories that we had as a child when we start learning about the world, and it's the unknown that's going to get you. The reality of humans being far worse than any creature comes as you're an adult, and you've experienced how bad people truly are. But there's always going to be that place for the monster coming after you, whatever shape or form that is, and having to get together and fighting that. So, and I love them as much as, you know, Hitler with dragons.
Yeah, I'm trying to think now because I feel like The Fifth Element's a really good example of a movie where there's like the big bad, like it's not even it's like a big asteroid thing in space that's just trying to destroy the world. And Zorg is like way more of an interesting villain than the thing in outer space. But one like non-human villain that I really like, it's like I guess it's sort of spoilery for the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer, like Annihilation. That one has a really cool villain that's like not even just one monster. I don't know. It's such a unique, weird thing. And I thought that was cooler than any human could be in some context, but it's almost like more like academically interesting. I don't really know how to define it. So I think I prefer human villains, but there can be these really cool abstract things too that do stuff to your head that a human couldn't do, I guess, is one way of thinking about it. Those are good books too. If anyone hasn't read them, I love those books.
I thought of an interesting one. I'm really dating myself here, but Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey is a really good non-human, you know, bad guy. In a lot of ways, I think that it's creepier than a human ever could be because of the AI.
Yeah, I love Hal. And he's kind of like whatever is like, you know, he's scary because he's like this really reduced, kind of concentrated version of what an aspect of human behavior that's super unsettling and cold and evil, and it's like this big projection of it. So it's all, you know, never can a red light be so sinister. It's awesome.
Oh man. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap up the chat, but I want everybody to take an opportunity.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt you. I think that's something really important. I think that Graham needs to show his axe to the people.
Break it out.
There you go, boys.
Yeah. I love it.
That's excellent.
I'm sorry, Mike. I should have remembered that from the beginning of the.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed it wasn't the focus of the
but I want everybody to take the opportunity. I want to know, you know, what do you have going on right now? Or, you know, do you have a new release coming out? Do you have a recent release, you know, in the past couple of months that has come out that you want to talk about? And then also, where can new readers start with your books? Graham.
God, you do that. Well, I've got 3 series on the go, one of which is complete, so new readers can start more or less anywhere. My original series, the first one, starts with Faye the Wild Hunt, which is your stereotypical epic fantasy. Then I drift into really dark stuff with Faithless, which the sequel to which I'm working on now. Hopefully that will be out this year, but who knows. Finally got The Law of Prometheus, which is more contemporary fantasy. It's Jason Bourne meets X-Men, So it's all thing to all people. Dive in wherever you like, really.
All right. Well, you can start with mine. We Are the Dead, the first book in the Last War trilogy. And the second book is called A Fool's Hope. And that's out in the US and Canada on Tuesday next week. But it's been out about a month everywhere else. Yeah, bad things happen to good people, and let's see who lives at the end.
My first book is where's the camera? There we go. Aching God. The first in the Iconoclast trilogy. You can think of it as Indiana Jones D&D with PTSD.
And it's really good.
I'm sorry?
And it's really good.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. Thank you very much.
Everyone should buy it.
The second book in the series is Sin Eater. It's been out for a little over a year now. Well, no, more than a year now. I don't even want to think about how long that's been out. But I'm very close to having the third book in the trilogy, Idol's Fall. What I know right now is it will be blue.
Blue.
Ryan.
Is it my turn? My turn to show? All right. Again, mine's the Dragons of Terra trilogy. It's the only series I've got going. So can start with Blood of an Exile, which is the first book. And there's the UK cover too. If you want a variation, got this little situation going. And then the second book came out in August, which is called Sorcery of a Queen. I've actually heard from people who read this one first and still liked it, which is surprising to me because the stories are very much intertwined. But yeah, I'd start with Blood of an Exile, and then Fury of a Demon, the third book. I am basically done with my part of it. I'm dotting the T's and crossing the I's or whatever you're doing. And that's coming out in August of this year, August 31st.
Well, I got 3 series out. Run War Saga. That's a 5-book series. It's very grimdark. I recommend it for post-pandemic. During the pandemic, I've got Dragon Mage. That actually just came out on the 8th of this month, so it's my new release. And yeah, if you want to buy one, yeah, that's the one to buy right now because it's a good escape from the pandemic. So.
So my main series is the Ordshaw books and contemporary fantasy thrillers. I've got one complete trilogy in that so far, and that's stuff I've got a mug for this. Oh, where am I going? Starts with that one under Ordshaw and continues with these two. Thank you. But it's got a couple of different starting points. The most recent book that I've released is actually a spin-off. It's going to be a duology, which is just a sort of globe-trotting action thriller featuring criminal jazz musicians. And they go from Louisiana to the Congo. It's a pretty wild ride, and that's called Camera is freaking out. Start with onion.
Awesome. So I can't end this yet because I forgot to talk about Brian's favorite subject. Brian.
Potpourri, yeah, it hasn't come up once, so.
How could it not?
I have to know. Graham got to show off his axe. Do you still have your lovely blanket that you've shown?
Dave, that was supposed to be our secret, and you bring it up every time we're on the internet together. Yeah, I have it. It's right here.
Come on.
My sister-in-law
Is
got
this
it for me.
your cuddle blanket?
Yeah, okay, so everyone makes fun of me because this is what a debut author would do. It's a big blanket of my cover.
It's upside down.
Upside down, right?
All right, here we go. I will say, though,
beautiful.
She got it off of Shutterstock, and it is an incredibly comfortable blanket. 10 out of 10 would recommend Shutterstocking the cover of your own book for a blanket.
Awesome.
He gets on to me, but he told me this the first time we chatted, and I have to bring it up every time because
that was a closed group. We were testing the software. We were amongst friends.
I'm just jealous.
It's a massive task.
It's my birthday next week. I want a blanket like that.
See, I don't think Brian realizes there's a market for that. Like people would buy blankets like that. I would totally buy one. So just remember that next time you get on to me. But really, all things being said, I really appreciate you all taking the time of your day to come chat about villains and anti-heroes and morally gray people and everything around and about through that. But I also want to give a big thanks to everybody that tuned in and that has continued to tune in these past couple of days. And just really appreciate everything. And then all of y'all that are watching now, just a heads up, there's another panel starting in about 40 minutes called But What Scares You? So we got a little horror panel coming up with some fantastic authors. So maybe, make sure you stay tuned to that. But as for this panel, make sure you check out all the novels they have recommended so far, and make sure to give them a follow over on Twitter. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, David. Amazing job. Well done.
Thank you.
Bye.